Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of TideIllustrated.com. Jack Knowlton, Tony Sakalis back for another Saturday edition of a little fall camp rundown. Tony, we're already getting to the home stretch of these, if you can believe it or not, because Alabama is running low on fall camp practices. I think there's only one more media viewing for practice left before we get into the thick of preseason. So there's been a ton of interesting happenings so far. You can go check out the other, episodes we've done where we've recapped it all. Alabama today, when you're listening to this, will be doing its second fall camp scrimmage. We, of course, talked a whole bunch about the first one. So, again, go listen to that stuff. But we're going to run down, Tony, you wrote 5 things that you're looking to learn from this scrimmage. But first and foremost, your general observations, like I've asked you the last couple of times. What have you noticed from Alabama's last couple of fall camp practices?
Yeah, first of all, holy crap. It is 2 weeks away from the season as we're listening. That is just absolutely nuts. It's flown by. I think there's a lot of encouraging stuff that we've seen from practice. I guess the biggest takeaway is some of these freshmen that, I guess there was some concern about, how they were going to kind of embed or how quickly they'd be able to adapt to the college level. You're getting a lot of positive praise or report from them. It's hard to truly evaluate some of these guys in the short little viewing periods we've gotten to watch. But I mean, a lot of these freshmen, they're high up in their position battles. You look at a guy like Xavier Brown, he has a club on his left hand. He's a freshman. He's still, learning things, and he's still at the beginning, of the cornerback group, and he's still fighting for that starting job. And then even guys like a redshirt freshman like Wilkin Formby holding onto that right tackle spot. So, a lot of youth is stepping into big roles, but I think it sounds like for the most part that they're ready for it. So that's kind of some interesting things that, that's my biggest takeaway, I would guess, I would say from camp so far.
Yeah, I want to ask you, about one of those younger players, but another one of these receivers. You wrote a couple articles, one on Caleb Odom, one on Emmanuel Henderson, a couple of guys in the receiver room kind of showing out. Obviously, we've talked about the top end of that group ad nauseum, but what have you noticed from those two? Caleb Odom had quite the highlight play, I know, from what Alabama pulled for tape from their scrimmage.
Oh boy, man. Yeah, you can see it. I think it's like the 27-second mark of the highlight video. Yeah, it's great. We had learned from sources that it kind of came on a free play. So the defense jumped off sides and you can just kind of throw it up, but it just shows off his athleticism. I mean, that was just would have been a top 10. I'm pretty sure, I think it was Emmanuel Henderson actually that said that it was one of the best catches he's seen live. It just shows, not only is Caleb Odom 6'5" and can move, but he has a really big catch radius and he's obviously got huge arms. And so you basically just throw it up to a guy like that and he'd probably make a play for the ball. Obviously, the coaches talked a little bit about his route running and, there's room for improvement. He's not just going to step in and be this, instant playmaker guy, maybe like Ryan Williams will be. But I think, at 6'5", if he can make catches like that, if he can, get his fundamentals down, it's hard to imagine them not finding some kind of package that they can kind of work him at. So he's just an exciting player, whether it's 2 years from now, whether it's this year, whether it's next year. I think it's just going to be fun to watch a 6'5" guy that can make those kind of plays. And then Emmanuel Henderson is a guy that kind of gets forgotten. He's been working kind of like that backup Z position. I think we've even seen him taking some reps at the X receiver position too, but he's kind of an outside guy. A guy that can do a lot of things too. I think the thing about this receiving core is they're so versatile. I mean, Emmanuel Henderson's a guy that played running back in high school and then he transitioned, he's kind of waited his turn. He can do a lot of things. And not to say that he's going to be like a running back or really even that he's going to get any carries or anything like that in this offense, but just, that kind of instinctual playmaking with the ball in his hand is going to be useful. I could see him being like a kickoff return guy, possibly a punt return guy. I think he's a guy that's maybe not like a high impact player, but somebody that can be in the rotation of receivers and can be a useful piece for Alabama.
Well, you mentioned, the versatile roles for the both of them. Henderson played running back. Odom, of course, was recruited by Alabama as a tight end. I liked your note in the story. He said, I think on Crimson Tide Sports Network, he never actually played tight end in high school. They just would put him out there to have an extra guy. And so he was, like he said, at Alabama originally he was going to be snapping at tight end, but now of course Demarcus Shepard has stolen him away, probably for the better, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, look, if you're lining up in the slot, as a quote unquote tight end in high school, and like, you look at some of these guys, and that's what you look at the running backs too. It's like, how much blocking are you going to do when you're the best player on the field? Yeah. So I mean, like, as far as doing tight end duties, it kind of shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that Caleb Odom, with his athleticism and his playmaking ability, wasn't asked to do very the grunt work of being a tight end in high school. So, he's built like a receiver. He's been able to beef up a little bit more, which I think will be important, but he's not, big, bulky tight end that you're used to blocking. If he was going to play tight end, I think he would have had to gain a lot more weight. I think, the overall goal is to keep him at wide receiver. And I think that's probably a good fit. And the interesting thing, Jack, I mean, you're new to Alabama, but it really hasn't been a thing with under Nick Saban's offense. There hasn't been a lot of like big receivers, and the ones that you did have really didn't make that big of an impact. I mean, Julio Jones was like 6'4". Other than him, unless I'm just like totally spacing on a guy, there wasn't like a big receiver that was like a standout guy. You look at, Amari Cooper, Devontae Smith, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Jalen Waddle. Those guys are all like 6'1". I think maybe you could stretch, maybe Jerry Jeudy might have been 6'2", but not really. So like you look at all those guys, they're kind of like 6'1" or shorter. They weren't necessarily small, but they definitely weren't 6'5". It's going to be interesting to see, Alabama have those bigger receivers. Now it seems like that's something that Kalen DeBoer wants to implement. He wants to have a little bit more size, not just only speed. That being said, all these receivers, you ask Jamarcus Shepard, the wide receiver coach, he says the number one thing that this unit has is speed. But I just think adding that size with Caleb Odom is so, like, I think it's just going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I'm a speed guy, so I enjoyed all those guys.
Jalen Waddle was fun.
Yeah, Jalen Waddle was fun. Smitty was an amazing receiver. He's great in the NFL now with the Eagles. So it sounds like it'll be a little bit more of a mix under DeBoer. But yeah, two guys to watch in that receiver room: Emmanuel Henderson and Caleb Odom. Let's dive in, Tony, to your 5 things you wrote. You wrote an article on what you're watching for or what you are hoping to learn from Alabama's second fall camp scrimmage on Saturday. We will start in the trenches. Your first point concerns a position that we've started to talk about, that right tackle spot. Obviously, Caden Proctor at left tackle starting to take all the reps at the one. Seems like he's locked that spot back down. But right tackle, will Conform be Elijah Pritchett? 2 names we talked about. What's the latest on them? What are you hoping to learn from that position room or that role specifically?
Yeah, at the moment, based on what we're seeing and kind of like the vibe I'm getting, Will Conformby's in the lead, and obviously that's pretty obvious, because he's worked with the ones the whole camp, and he took the majority of the first team reps during last weekend's scrimmage. But he seems like he's got a good lead on this competition. I still think it's close. I asked Coach Chris Kapilovich about it. And he kind of said that, when he was talking about Will Conformby, he talked a lot about his understanding of the offense. He's a guy that, really kind of understands the assignments, always doing the right things. He can also obviously make plays, has great athleticism, but it's about consistency. Can he, he's a guy that, didn't really play last year, and it's just a matter of getting those reps, executing those reps rather on a, throughout the whole drive, and not just having a let up play, or, because a let up play at tackle can really, devastate the offense. You give up a big sack, it just slows you down. And then when Kapelovich was talking about Elijah Pritchett, it seemed like maybe he didn't emphasize as much of the knowledge of the game. But I think when you look at Pritchett, he's just so, so much of just a natural talent. Like, you look at his build and his athleticism, and just like, I mean, he was the top tackle in the 2022 class. He's got all the potential right there. So if he can put things more together in terms of getting his assignments right, kind of some of the stuff that Will Conformby has been doing that I think has been putting Wilkin ahead. If Elijah can start mastering that, I think he's got all the talent in the world, and this could really be a competition. The interesting thing is that there's not really a rush to make a decision. If both of these guys are executing around the same level, there's an argument that it's better to rotate them in and out. I mean, as long as you're not losing anything by making that switch during games, you could really keep, both of them fresh. Obviously, when somebody separates, you're going to want to have them the most reps you can with the best guy. But if they're both, performing around the same, and, as long as they're both to an adequate standpoint, I think that it could be beneficial to kind of rotate. We saw that a little bit with the guard position a couple of years ago. So I wouldn't be super shocked to see, maybe kind of rotating doors, maybe 3 series with Wilkin and then 2 series with Pritchett and then back to Wilkin again. And so at least maybe in the first 2 games or something like that. I could definitely see that. That's not to say that it's going to be that way, but that in all of this, that is a strong possibility as well.
Do you think in the same way that I think we've heard Coach Cap kind of spin it, where he said, if both guys are doing good things, we'll rotate them in. Do you spin that in more of a positive light like he has, or does that make you more concerned that neither of them are really adequate to fill the role?
I think you got to take everything he says as a whole, right? So, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a positive. I don't think they're both doing so well that you just can't keep either one of them off the field. So right. I guess you could count that kind of as a negative. But at the same time, he's looking for consistency, which means that, they are showing flashes. So really what I look at is you just need to find some form of consistency, whether it's with one guy or with both. The problem with having 2 inconsistent tackles, if you're rotating, is like you're trying to catch lightning in a bottle, right? Because you want to make sure that when Wilkin comes in, he's at his best. Because if he comes in and has a sloppy, series, and then you put in Pritchett and he has a sloppy series, then you're getting the bad side of both of those inconsistencies. Mm-hmm. So you really kind of just want to know that you have that dependability. Kapelovich talked a lot about trust. And so if you feel like you can trust both guys at the moment, I kind of take it as more of a good thing, because I do think that they are both showing something. I guess it would be worse if, you were talking about consistency, but it was clearly just Wilkin or clearly just Pritchett. The good thing is they both have potential. I don't think you would say that either of them are there yet. And guess what? I don't necessarily know if, Caden Proctor is 100% what he's going to be either. Let's not just, forget about him. He still has growth to make at the left side of the line as well. But I do think that there's potential from each one of those guys, and that's a positive. And, the season is creeping up on us, but we do have 2 more weeks of camp, or 2 more weeks of 1 week of camp, 1 week of game week preparations. And then let's face it, I mean, you got 2 manageable games before you make that trip to Wisconsin. So there's time for the offensive line to kind of figure things out. And it seems like they're making progress. These next couple of weeks are going to be obviously massive in terms of building that trust, building that consistency. But I think, to answer your question, I would take it more of a positive.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see what we learn kind of on that front here in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, and Saturday will be pretty telling if we get some answers from DeBoer, and then next week from Coach Cap as well. Interesting status in the trenches going on for Alabama. Behind those guys, or who those guys will block for, natural segue. You wrote about the running backs, Tony, and maybe some injury concerns with that unit. What's the situation going on with Justice Haynes, Jam Miller, Richard Young, all those guys? Yeah,
I mean, I wrote about what's left of the running back unit from the last time we saw them, right? Because there's only been really one healthy or fully healthy running back from what we saw. Now, the last time, the disclaimer here is the last time we were able to see a viewing period was on Tuesday. But during that time, Justice Haynes was the only scholarship back that was both there and not in a black jersey, because you had Jam Miller was in a black jersey. Freshman Kevin Riley was in a black jersey. Richard Young was off to the side, not even working in individual drills, in a black jersey. And then obviously we saw Daniel Hill with a sling. He wasn't even at the viewing period on Tuesday, but we saw him in a sling on the Sunday's open practice. So, I mean, you'd have to think that at the moment, Daniel Hill's probably still out if he's, I don't know, but, you would tend to imagine that he's out. And then you've got Richard Young, Kevin Riley, and Jam Miller all banged up to some extent, right? We don't know. I don't think anything's thought to be serious of that bunch, but yeah, heading into the scrimmage, I think that's probably one thing you look at. If somebody's banged up, how much reps do you want to give them? How much contact do you want them to take? The running back position, obviously, if you're going to take reps, you're going to get some kind of contact, or else it's kind of worthless. So it'd be interesting. I mean, are they just going to roll out, Justice Haynes and some walk-ons? Or, is Jalen Milroe going to be, okay to take some reps? Maybe he'll take a limited role. We really don't know because we haven't seen the backs since Tuesday. But I wouldn't be shocked if, we hear that it was kind of a limited day for that running back unit. You just don't want to get anyone hurt when you don't have to. So we'll probably find out a lot more about that, following the scrimmage, just based on like what we hear from, maybe sources there before. I'm sure Kalen DeBoer will be asked about the running backs. So I know Kalen's a little bit tight-lipped when it comes to injuries, but he should be able to provide, at least some kind of indication if it's something that fans should worry about in terms of a major injury. At the moment, you could see, I mean, other than, Daniel Hill not working out, Richard Young, he was moving fine. Kevin Riley was moving fine. Same with Jam Miller. Riley and Miller were going through drills. They just had non-contact jerseys. We don't get to see the contact part of practice, so really don't know how that was handled. But I wouldn't necessarily hit the panic button, but it does kind of serve as a reminder of how quickly things can kind of snowball. You go from having a really deep running back room to only having one guy that doesn't have some kind of knock. It just shows you how fast and how important the depth is at that spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that last point's a really good one. Like, it kind of seems like a couple of the coaches now have talked about how they almost feel this running back room is one of, if not maybe even the deepest on the team with some of the options they have there. I talked to Justice Haynes. He kind of agrees. They feel like they've developed a lot of good chemistry there. So, yeah, that getting disrupted by injuries would certainly be unfortunate. But, yeah, it seems like it's just so far kind of precautionary stuff. We'll see, of course, how much they're kind of involved in the scrimmage. Any takes with any of them individually? I feel like we talk a lot about this kind of running back collective. I feel like I've heard some kind of good stuff about Jam Miller so far. And I know he talked to us on the day the ice cream truck showed up at practice. So, I mean, anyone that you've kind of heard standing out, whether it's, one of the freshmen or Justice or Jam?
I think it's going to be between Justice and Jam. And I really think they're kind of they're like 1A, 1B. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't really know, like, who's going to be the guy. I don't really think there will be a guy. If somebody gets a starting role, I think it's probably going to be more semantics of like, being able to say he got the start. I think you're going to probably see 2 series here, 2 series there with those guys. They can pretty much do the same thing. I know the coaches have said that they offer different things, but to me they're kind of the same back. They both can catch out of the backfield. They both run very hard. They're elusive. I think you have to work with pass blocking with both of those guys. I don't think, Alabama returns like an established pass blocker running back, like a veteran guy. That's what you lose when you don't have the veteran option, really, is those guys usually know how to pass block a little bit better. So that's the thing that I think, I'd have to raise a red flag when you look at Alabama's running back room. But in terms of those guys, and then really even when you look at Richard Young, another guy that can do everything as well, can catch out of the backfield, can run really hard. So they're all similar body types. It's not like you have like a Derrick Henry and a, Jahmyr Gibbs, where they're just so different. It's not one of those things. I think so. Kind of the same thing with the right tackle, right? They'll keep each other fresh during games, and I think that will help. And they seem pretty humble about it too.
Yeah.
You don't have one guy that just like needs to be the bell cow back. I think the humble nature of this unit is going to be really big too, because obviously when you have a quarterback like Jalen Milroe, you're going to take advantage of his running ability, and that's going to eat up some of the running yards too. So if you have a running back that's trying to like make a Heisman run, and is all me, and wants to get 1,500 yards, he's on the wrong offense, because I can't see any way that any running back gets 1,500 yards for Alabama this year, unless there's a major injury, just because there's just going to be split so much, So I think that you're going to have like this constant, committee that's just like almost like interchangeable, assembly line of like quality backs that are just all able to do the same thing. And I think it could really wear defenses down this fall.
I wrote a story Jalen Milroe called their group exterminators on a radio show, and I asked Justice Haynes about that, and he said they do not have a nickname for their running back unit yet, but he very much sees them kind of in that role. He's like, we come in, we clean things up, make sure we're taking care of business. So I think that humbleness is
trying to get the down. Try to get the patent down on the NIL before you start.
Right. Yeah, we don't have a nickname, but they've got to be workshopping, surely.
Wait,
also,
3 weeks, there'll be an exterminator shirt on the Yay Alabama, right?
Yeah, I feel like I'll demand some royalties if that happens. Also, if you're looking from a chemistry perspective too, Justice Haynes also said the best college football player among the running back room is Daniel Hill. So his thumbs are clearly working, even if something else about his arm is injured because he's wearing a sling. But
you mean in terms of the video game?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know did I not say that? I might have just missed.
Oh, yeah, I didn't hear it right there. Like, no.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Daniel Hill is the best running back at the college football video game per Justice Haynes. So there's a little deep dive in the running back room. Your third point, Tony, switching over to defense, and this is a unit we're going to talk about again. We're going to keep talking about the cornerback room, and it concerns DaShawn Jones. You talked about DaShawn Jones, and interestingly enough, has seen a couple more reps with the twos than it seems like we might have initially thought. Xavier Brown, a guy who's also been playing with a club on his hand in some practices, has taken a lot of reps with the ones. What's kind of the situation there with that other cornerback spot that seemingly is going to be next to Damani Jackson this year?
Yeah. Well, throughout camp, it had, during viewing periods and whatnot, we had seen Xavier Brown kind of work more with the ones. But then, according to sources at the scrimmage last weekend, DaShawn Jones took most of the first team reps across from Damani Jackson with the ones. So interesting. And I kind of feel smart because I think last time we talked, I talked about maybe the first scrimmage being a point where, DaShawn Jones's experience would weigh, a lot more, and that maybe the spot where he can kind of make his push for that starting role. And obviously it sounds like he did that a little bit, or he got those first team reps. I don't think it was a perfect day for DaShawn Jones, but I think it's good for him that he's able to get those reps and get that experience with the first team defense. That's a tight battle. I'm interested to see, I think if DaShawn Jones is the first team the first team cornerback again, for this spring's, this second scrimmage, I think that that's probably a sign that he's probably going to be the guy that rolls out first against Western Kentucky. But I don't think there's any like guarantee that that's the case, right? I mean, there's been so much, positivity around Xavier Brown. We've seen him work in individual drills. He just doesn't look like a freshman. And the way he's handled even, hurting his hand and having the club there, it hasn't really slowed him down. And for a lot of times, freshmen, you already have the adversity of trying to learn the defense and, get used to the college level, and just doesn't seem like anything's slowing Xavier Brown down. So I wouldn't be surprised if he rolled out there with the ones either. But that's one of the things I'm kind of looking at. I think you go 2 straight scrimmages with the veteran, I think you're kind of making a little bit of a statement. So if DaShawn Jones is that, first team cornerback on Saturday or today, if you're listening, I kind of get the strong hunch that he will be the guy, at least to start the season. But, that just like the tackle position, Jack, that can change. I mean, you can go two weeks into it, and Xavier Brown could pass him up. I think that's going to be a battle, especially when you look at the ceilings of Xavier Brown and even Jalen Mbakwe. You look at those two guys, they have such high ceilings. Even if they don't start the season as the certified starter, I could see them playing their way up into that role, midway, even early in the season.
It's sort of funny. You say that, and I agree with you that it's like the tackle battles. But where I asked you how could that be a concern that neither tackle's adequate enough, I almost feel the opposite with having Jones and Brown, where it almost feels like that gives Alabama more depth than maybe we thought. That the drop off between where we thought Jackson and Jones were to where the freshmen were coming in is actually a little bit less, it sounds like, than what we initially thought. I'll add a little quote you had from Mo Linguist. He said, "I love DaShawn. I think what he's provided right now is an older guy that's been in big games. It's a very steady way about himself. Steady is the best way to describe him, which I guess is probably good for a guy in a cornerback room when you're defending receivers in the SEC. So, yeah, some interesting develops in the cornerback room. be interested to see too if Xavier Brown. He did not play the scrimmage with the club on, right?
No, I think he did. He's had the club
He was
on.
he had stuff.
We were able
Okay.
to play with the club, you know.
Yeah.
He just really hasn't bothered him. I mean, obviously, I guess if he was trying to go for a pick, it'd be a little bit harder to catch with the club. But you know, you even
Pin
kind
it.
of we've seen him make kind of plays with that. So I don't think that's really, you know, we've seen you can play an actual game with the club on. Is, you know, it's going to limit you somewhat, but it's possible to do that. But going back to that quote that Malingua said, that hammers home to what I was saying is, I think when you look at DaShawn Jones, he's almost like, I don't want to devalue what he can bring because he's a pretty good player on his own. He led Wake Forest in interceptions last year. But I think he's kind of more of a safety net of like, you know, you have a veteran that you know can do it, right? So if you know, want to send someone out there that you're comfortable, you can win with, he's that guy. I think his ceiling is probably not as high as the other two guys, though. So I think like if Alabama's defense is going to click on its maximum potential, I think that it might be a Xavier Brown or Jalen Mbakwe that kind of takes them to that level. So that might be something to watch later on down the season. Now, look, I've been wrong a million times. So there could be a chance that DaShawn Jones just comes here and shuts me up and has, you know, works his way to the NFL next year. I'm not trying to limit what he can do, but the way I see it is he's kind of your dependable option. And then the other guys could really be like wild cards in terms of you start looking at X factors of, you know, can Alabama contend for a title? Well, some of these things, if some of these, you know, young guys can really hit and reach their 5-star potential early in their careers, I think those could be really big, you know, like I said, X factors are big boosts throughout the season.
So we'll cut that right before you said you're not trying to devalue DaShawn Jones and then crop it and tweet it at him and then let him use that as the proverbial rat poison. Your fourth thing, Tony.
Yeah, just to make everybody upset.
Yeah, exactly. Just tweet it at the team, tag them all in it. Your fourth thing, Tony, we're going back to the offensive side. You talked about the QBs. Nick Sheridan, the offensive coordinator, was asked, didn't really tip his hand. He was just asked about the room in general. Said he was pleased with all the quarterbacks, seen growth, progress, and all that stuff. Per our sources, you said that Milroe and Ty Simpson have both threw a couple touchdown passes in the scrimmage. I want to ask you specifically about Milroe in a second and some of the improvements it sounds like he's made. But just with this QB room in general, how have you maybe observed and kind of heard them sort of pushing each other? It seems like it's a good thing. You know, it's a competitive room. It was seen as a deep room coming in. Sounds like those guys are pushing Milroe from bottom to top there.
Yeah, I think it's a positive sign that Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson both went down to Tampa to work with the receivers. It wasn't just Milroe. It was both of them. So I think that, you know, obviously there's competition there. So there's going to be a little bit of rivalry, maybe, you know, just competitive rivalry. I think you probably have some of that. But it's kind of like the running back room, like you said, like where they are pushing each other. And during this, you know, the scrimmage last weekend, the first scrimmage, I think both Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson, from what we heard, had really good days. You know, Jalen Milroe had 3 touchdowns to the air. He did have an interception, but then he also had a touchdown on the ground. Ty Simpson had 3 touchdowns and didn't turn the ball over. I think you would say that, you know, from talking to people, that Jalen had the better day of the two, just in terms of what he was doing. He was also asked to do more. You know, I think that that's encouraging that you're seeing Jalen Milroe's development, but I think it's nice to have somebody like Ty Simpson to push him, and also to be that safety net too. When you talk about Jalen Milroe as a guy that, you know, likes to take off, and he's a big dude. And so it's not like he's really, you know, some fragile guy that you have to kind of put in bubble wrap, but you don't want your quarterback taking too many hits. And if he does take the wrong hit during a game, I think it's at least some form of comfort that you have a guy like Ty Simpson who's able to step in. You know, I think not every team has someone as good as Ty Simpson at that backup position. So it's good to see that from an Alabama perspective, they're both, you know, developing and both had strong scrimmages. I think the thing you look for is just, it's kind of sound like coach speak or a broken record, but you look at the consistency there too, right? You know, you don't want to have Jalen Milroe have this positive, you know, get his momentum going in scrimmage number 1, only to see him struggle in, you know, the second scrimmage. And then all of a sudden we're talking in the next week about, okay, is there a reason to be worried? Or, you know, and then you start off the season with a little bit of a cloud of uncertainty. You just don't want that. You want him to have a strong scrimmage, to increase the confidence of the offense, increase his own confidence, and have him something to build on. I think, Jalen Milroe seems like a guy that really builds off of, positive affirmation and I think he's probably like most quarterbacks can be kind of hard on himself as well. He's a perfectionist. So I think if you allow somebody like that to get some momentum, something to kind of boost their confidence and get them rolling, their drive and, their competitiveness will kind of push them to get to the levels they need to get to. I just think that the last thing you need right now is some kind of setback or uncertainty where you start, from Jalen Milroe's perspective, maybe second guessing your decision making, or, and you start taking a little bit longer where the game was slowing down, but now it's speeding back up because you're doubting yourself a little bit. I think you just want to develop that confidence in him and kind of keep him rolling in the right direction.
How did you feel hearing some of the reports that he has made? He looked a lot sharper in the first scrimmage, and it kind of goes to what you just said. But are you encouraged by? Obviously, it's only one scrimmage, and in practice they're obviously playing against air at times. But it sounds like he's we've talked all day long about getting better at the intermediate throws, all the underneath stuff. That's all been written about, talked about. But how encouraged were you from those first results? And then obviously should we hear the same from scrimmage number 2 that he has fully made that jump heading into the season? I think, maybe you taper it a little bit with some, like you said, some easier games at the beginning. You have to see how it is against Wisconsin and Georgia and all that. But how encouraged have you been so far?
Yeah, I think there's reason for optimism. I don't think that you're going to get like full on, drastic changes from Jalen from what we saw from the last season. I don't think you're just going to like walk in against Western Kentucky and see a totally different quarterback. I think you're going to see a steady improvement. What you want to see, like I said, is just building to that right direction so that later on in the season, he is reaching those heights that he can reach, because if he can kind of continue his momentum as a passer, we've all seen what he can do as a playmaker. You can start combining those two parts of this game, and he might be the most unstoppable player in college football. But it's a build towards that, and I don't think that comes overnight. It doesn't come overnight just in terms of if he was learning the same offense as last year. It's just that development takes time. It's going to take maybe even more time now that he's learning a completely new system. So, I think that it's going to take a little bit of patience, but I think, I'm expecting to see a lot of reason for optimism against Western Kentucky when he rolls out. And I think you're just going to see it build. And hopefully from an Alabama perspective, you really start seeing it click in Wisconsin and Georgia. And those are the games that Alabama is going to need him to be more at his best. And so that's what, not like a broken record, but consistency and constant momentum is going to be so key, especially at that position.
Theme of this episode, consistency, which you get consistent stories if you subscribe. That ticker.
How many times have I said the word consistency? But
let me see if I can. I'm going to do it while I'm talking. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see, what kind of emerges from the next scrimmage with him. Like you said, building on what sounded like was some positive momentum from the first one. Your 5th point, back to defense. Talked about tackling a little bit from this side, of course. I'll read a quote from Kane Womack. He said, "I thought our tackling was just okay. We were running the ball probably as good as I've seen since we've been here. But I think overall, from a tackling standpoint, those things that you got to get better at from the scrimmage, you've got to get better at from scrimmage 1 to scrimmage 2. You posed in your article, you said, was the first scrimmage tackles just a blip on the radar, or could they foreshadow a bigger concern for the defense moving forward?" Obviously, before hearing what the coaches have to say from next week, and you'll kind of get that answer. What do you think? Do you think it is kind of a blip with what Womack is talking about, some of the tackling struggles in scrimmage 1, or do you think there maybe could be some longer term issues there?
It's tough to fully say. I think when you look at an inside linebacking duo that has Jahad Campbell and Deontay Lawson, it's hard to imagine that like tackling is going to be an issue. Those guys are some pretty tough dudes. You also look at players like Malachi Moore and Keon Sabb, and we got the consistency counter.
Got the consistency counter. Sorry to interrupt you.
Arbitrary number. Okay. No, but you look at some of those guys in the defense. It's like hard to imagine that tackling would be an issue, but we've seen, it rear its ugly head. A couple of years ago, there was talk, maybe, yeah, I think like a couple years ago where, Alabama's kind of lost its edge at defense. It didn't play with the same nastiness. And I think a lot of that assumption from fans was that, it had to do with the tackles. I know that there was a stat on the missed tackles. I'm trying to look back and remember. But I remember that, a couple of years ago, tackling was an issue, and it was something that, we talked a lot about. Seemed like it got a little bit better this past season. But yeah, I mean, if that's going to be a problem, then that's something that's almost like an identity thing, right? You can control tackling. Sometimes make a mistake, the offense can catch you off guard, especially early on in the scrimmage. But I think, with tackling, that should be a constant thing that you take pride in as a defender, and it's a real controllable aspect of the game. So I think that's probably why Kane Womack, noted that and really wants to see an improvement in that.
Yeah, I guess it's it's going to be one of those things, finding that defensive identity. That's I feel like been a big theme across, whether it's defensive line, linebackers, secondary, whatever it may be, is finding that identity. Like you mentioned, that nastiness that Saban's defense had, but certainly you don't want. I mean, missed tackles, I feel like, is up there. If you're ranking things that infuriate fans the most in a football game, I think missed tackling I would put in my top 5, maybe even top 3.
Stop someone for a 2-yard gain, turns into a 7-yard gain. Those are drive kill. Those are drive extenders, actually, not drive killers. But yeah,
absolutely, yeah. It's so we'll see. I guess from a tackling perspective, if we hear a better report coming out of next week. Any final things, Tony, from what you're looking forward to learning about from this scrimmage in the last couple weeks of practice here? Any way too early predictions? We're almost in that time where we'll start making season-long predictions, and obviously predictions for Western Kentucky. Not as fun as maybe some later in the season, but
I don't know any predictions just yet. I'll have to see. I kind of want to use this second scrimmage to maybe get some more ideas of the team, but I'm interested just from the scrimmage too. One of the things I didn't put in the article is, like, you never know. The scrimmage is such an unknown. Like, right? Did we think that LT Overton was going to be like the star on defense of last scrimmage? Probably not. Caleb Odom made that catch. There'll be something in this scrimmage that happens that kind of catches us off guard, at least usually, right? So, I mean, it's kind of interesting to see, like, who that guy's going to be. Is this Keon Sabbs big, just taking another, transfer defensive starter, but, like, is that a guy that could come in and, like, we're going to see him have a big day? Is that who we're going to be talking about? Or, are we going to see, just like another young receiver? We're going to see like Cole Adams, like, have 3 touchdowns or something like that. Yeah, it's just always interesting because it could be anything. And you look at this Alabama team, both on offense and defense, there's not as many like certified stars, but there's a lot of guys that could be breakout guys. And so scrimmages like this are always interesting because it could be anyone, and so I'm just kind of looking forward to see, like, does anyone that we weren't expecting to stand out?
Yeah, absolutely. LT Overton, the 285-pound ass kicker, as Kane Womack described him recently. So, he's been one that's been fun watching his kind of breakout over fall camp. Seems like he's going to be a good addition. I think you make some good points, and we'll see kind of who maybe emerges as the big winner of the second scrimmage. We'll obviously come back next week and talk about the next few things we see at fall camp. But until then, you should tune in to Tide Illustrated, because Tony's going to have practice nuggets and all the storylines coming out of scrimmage. We got great team and recruiting content coming your way. Season's almost here. Can't believe it, but summer's over, football's back, and the best time to subscribe to Tide Illustrated is right now. Subscribe here on the YouTube as well. And until next time, we'll catch you later.